Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting, the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting for October 26, 2021. Before we call tonight's meeting to order, Dr. McGarry, will you please outline the public participation procedures for tonight? Thank you.
Tonight we have a special meeting, passing a resolution. The board would like to pass a resolution. Prior to that, there was a sign-in sheet for those who are attending in person. We will certainly take in-person comments first. They were to have signed in by 6 o'clock this evening. And I believe that there will be allowed public comment prior to the board actually passing the resolution. That can be phoned in, or anyone here in the audience can also participate by coming to the microphone and stating their name, address, and what they'd like to comment on. Same will go for those who are attending virtually this evening before the board takes action on their special agenda item this evening for board action. Those who are participating virtually can phone in, comment at 610-789-7200, extension 2000, or they can send us an email at boardmeetingcomments@upwardrbsd.org. Please provide your name, address, and what you'd like to comment on, and the board will take that into consideration and become part of the record before moving forward. Obviously, those who are attending in person will go first, and then we'll go from there. And after that meeting, I'll bring us up to speed on how to participate in the committee meetings this evening. Board President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Please feel free to revisit that at your discretion as the meeting progresses. The regular in-person and virtual meeting of the Upper Darby School District Board of School Directors will please come to order. There was a closed session on October 18, 2021 from 4:56 p.m. until 6:15 p.m. for matters to be discussed within the limitations for closed deliberations as prescribed by Pennsylvania Act 93 of 1998. For this evening's meeting, there were real estate and litigation matters. Roll call, Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers, please.
Dr. Haig.
Present.
Mr. Desnoyers.
Present.
Mr. Warsavage.
Present.
Mr. Neal.
Present.
Ms. Williams.
Present.
Mr. Fields.
Present.
Ms. Mitchell.
Present.
Mrs. Curry.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. Are there any amendments to offer?
Yes, President Brown, we had one amendment. We added the public comment section required by law, the general public comment section at the end of the agenda.
Thank you. Will anyone move to add the described item to the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. The agenda with the approved amendments has been moved and seconded. All those in favor already has voted. Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. The summer stage resolution is in the hands of each board member and has been made available to the public. I move for its adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the board? Hearing none, are there any comments from the public? Okay, please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Colleen Kennedy, 8723 Westchester Pike. So I just wanted to preface that I appreciate that these negotiations are ongoing and that there's a lot that I probably don't know. I want to publicly call for support for Harry's plan for an independent summer stage. I trust in Upper Darby Arts and Education Foundation, Harry Dietzler, and Jen Shaner. I do have a few questions in regards to this resolution, and I would appreciate your patience because I don't have a physical copy to look off of in reference to it, but I wrote some notes. So the first question I have is, my understanding is that the discontinuance of staff for summer stage was after people retiring and not filling those positions, not a collective bargaining agreement, but I might be wrong about that. So I was wondering if someone could clarify. I'm going to just read the other two questions and then you can totally answer. And then the second question is, why do we keep calling the Upper Darby Performing Arts Center the high school auditorium? Is there like a legal reason for that? I was wondering if someone could provide some clarification to the public. And then the third question I have, in clause 3 of this resolution, you cite rental space at a discount to the district's normal fee. And then in clause 4, you cite that services shall be offered at no less than the full cost of such services to the district. And so I'm just a little bit confused as to whether there was an upcharge previously or which of those two clauses we're going with. And finally, just in closing, I support an independent summer stage. I strongly encourage all elected stakeholders to understand that until Harry lets the public know that a good deal has been made here, we will continue to speak out. I trust Harry's commitment to our arts programs and the kids, and I trust Jen Shaner. It's for those programs and the kids that we continue to speak out, not to disrespect anyone. Thank you. And if you have any answers to my questions, that would be great.
Dr. McGarry, do we normally address it at these meetings or not? Kyle, I defer to you. Do we normally address it at these meetings, or does a resolution stand on its own?
First of all, as far as whether or not the board wants to have any sort of response, you're certainly welcome to do so. I would respectfully note that normally if you were going to be making comment about public comment after the comment is over, it is entirely after comments are over, not engaging in a back and forth that way.
Got it. Okay. So we'll revisit that once all the comments are made. Okay.
Just
I
as a
made
point
note of the questions, so.
Okay, just as a point of clarification, you'll try to answer those questions before you take a vote on the resolution? Am I understanding correctly?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes. Okay, are there any other comments from the public? Ms. Buford?
There are no comments on this resolution.
Okay. So I think that's all the comments we have on the resolution. So Dr. McGarry, if you wanted to speak to any of that, that would be great. Any of the questions that were raised, I'm sorry.
I can speak to two of the three.
Okay.
I can't speak to the comments in the resolution. I did not, I don't know all the exact details of that aspect of it, that I don't feel comfortable with that part.
Okay.
But I can speak to, we have hired all staff. There are no personnel changes, so that statement is not accurate. Any staff that have left have been hired or replaced, so we have not lost staff through any attrition as a result to this program. As far as the naming, it has Performing Arts Center above it. It is a high school auditorium. It's used interchangeably, whether it's our facilities plan or use. The terms are used interchangeably. So Performing Arts Center will remain on the outside of the building, but in a lot of ways, it is a high school auditorium, so those are kind of interchangeable terms.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we've heard all comments from the public. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. We're now at the time for the public hearing. We will call on residents who signed in to address the board in the order in which they signed in, followed by emailed and phoned comments. We would ask that you come forward, give your name and address, and present your comments in the 3-minute time limit in accordance with Policy 903. The time allotted for general comments, both in person and submitted comments, will not exceed 1 hour. So there was only one person that signed in. I don't think you can, because I think you...
Ma'am, you're certainly welcome to speak,
Okay.
but you need to understand that this isn't actually a forum for asking questions.
I understand, but I signed in.
That's what I'm saying. You're certainly allowed to speak.
Oh, understood, okay.
You're not allowed, it's not a question and answer dialogue type of situation.
Understood, thank you very much.
So you want to... Okay, let me just cross this out, because you
I
said...
only need 30 seconds, I'm sorry about that. So Colleen Kennedy, 8723 Westchester Pike. I would just encourage that in the future, on hot button issues, that we know that there might be a lot of public comment, that if it's going to be the very beginning of an earlier meeting, that we try to advertise that as much as possible, because there are a lot of folks that wanted to comment today and they didn't realize it was going to happen at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion for the adjournment of the meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned. We'll take 5 minutes before we start the Education and Pupil Services meeting. Thank you. Welcome to the Education and Pupil Services Committee in-person and virtual meeting. The meeting will come to order. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve the previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Need a second.
Second.
The agenda has been moved and seconded. Are there any amendments to offer?
No, there are not.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to co-chair Mrs. Mitchell.
Thank you, President Brown. Hello, everyone. Mr. Marshallek, would you please start with an overview of the agenda items?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have two agenda items. The first one is for board action. Ms. Elizabeth Riches, Supervisor of Science, Family Consumer Science, and Health and Phys Ed, will present the elementary science program up for board action in November, at November 9th board meeting. Second agenda item is informational this evening. It's the elementary progress report update. Ms. Kelly will give an update to the board and the public on what to expect in this fall's progress report for elementary school students. And that is it for tonight.
Thank you. So if you can go ahead and start with agenda item number 1, that'd be great.
All right, I'm going to welcome Ms. Riches up to the stage.
Good evening, members of the Upper Darby School Board, Superintendent McGarry, and the community. I want to talk to you about a new elementary science program for our students here in the district, which I think is desperately needed and reflects a change in the state of Pennsylvania's standards. We have new science standards coming, which reflect the next generation science standards. We went through a process for recommendation, which started in January of this year, and we have settled on a program called Twig Science. And I want to talk to some highlights and talk to you about a professional development plan that we would follow if the program is approved. Pennsylvania is shifting to new standards. Our current standards were adopted more than 10 years ago in 2009, and they emphasize learning facts at simply higher levels of thinking, but focusing very much on facts that is very much a silo set of standards which separates science from the other content areas. The new standards, based on the nationally recognized next generation science standards, feature something called three-dimensional learning, which looks at students learning cross-cutting concepts that move across all content areas in science. The key disciplinary core ideas of science, which are what we traditionally would think about as the science facts, and science and engineering practices, which reflect a STEM attitude and the way of thinking about science and problem solving in a real-world situation. Surrounding that are relating science concepts to Pennsylvania-specific examples, because we want our students to be good citizens and be informed about the issues and concerns in Pennsylvania. And there are also content area connections where we support reading and math through science, where students are engaged because they find the science so interesting, and then that kind of pulls them in. That's the hook that pulls them into reading and doing higher level math to achieve some of their science goals. The new standards are coming to Pennsylvania in 2024. This process has been going on now for several years, but it's the hope that they will be approved hopefully within the next 6 to 8 months for implementation in the 24-25 school year. So we'll be a little bit ahead of the curve as far as implementing a science program. Pennsylvania's new vision for science has some key points. One of them is that every student is capable of science, engineering, technological, and environmental literacy. And that really aligns well with our district's equity goals of having every student participate to the fullest extent possible. They also believe that science with the environment, the ecology, technology, and engineering, all those concepts can be explored through an integrative and active learning process. We don't want somebody standing at a whiteboard droning for hours. We want kids doing science, getting their hands dirty, putting things together, and engaging on a variety of levels. The ideas of iteration and reflection are critical components of the learning process, where you try something, it works or it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you think about why did this not work, and then you go back and you try it again, and you repeat that process. This encourages students to build grit and determination and not to give up after their first failed attempt, but to keep trying and to understand that a failure is just another opportunity to learn. And the new science vision understands that success depends upon the partnerships between educators, students, families, post-secondary institutions and providers, legislators, businesses, and industries. Having a well-educated students who are well-educated in science and literate in the STEM fields is vital to the success of our Pennsylvania communities. The process we followed, I started by meeting with Delaware County Intermediate Unit's Dr. Andrew Weatherhead, who helped us get started and gave us some guidance using something called the Next Gen Time Protocol, which is from West Ed Publishers, which is a sort of a science think tank. And they kind of guided us in some thoughts to think about what makes a good curriculum, what are some ideas you need to look for, what are things you should avoid when you're choosing a curriculum. We looked at presentations of 9 different programs from 8 different publishers and narrowed it down to 3 that we felt really were close to what we had in mind. At that point, we had teams. I had worked just exclusively with the 3 elementary science coaches, and once we had 3 publishers, we brought in panels of teachers, administrators, the instructional coaches, and I had representatives from the special education department, from the district equity supervisor, Melissa Figueroa Douglas, and from our EL department as well, who all looked at the materials from their particular lenses to see if there was some, how that looked from their lens. And they all agreed that this company, Twig, had the best product. The district ARs have been filed according to Policy 108. So Twig Science Next Gen is the program that we have chosen. It's a very visually rich program, which is visually engaging and also contains the deep level of science content. Its copyright is 2020, so it's very current. And they are continually updating their website with new information. Science always changes because new ideas are uncovered and new conclusions are reached, and so they're updating the website. And each year, if there are new standards or new ideas, things that need to be fixed, when we get our new set of student materials, they will reflect whatever changes have been made since the last set was printed. So they do stay current. Twig Next Gen has sort of 3 focus areas. One of them is the idea of the real world phenomena, where students will engage with their curiosity and be prompted to ask scientific questions. They engage in hands-on discovery, reading and writing about the scientific ideas. And there are also STEM integration, where they apply and integrate the science and engineering practices. And we have a short video in the next slide that just explains what phenomenon are and how they're used in Twig.
A rising moon, a setting sun, a spider spinning its web, an ice sheet collapsing, a rover landing on Mars. We see these things, and we're filled with wonder. They're all examples of phenomena. Phenomena, observable events that occur in a natural or designed system. Events that we can explain with science. Phenomena inspire curiosity. Twig Science inspires understanding.
And those clips were just some examples. If it's a video introduction, it's that caliber of videography. So they're very well made. Some highlights of the program: there's a student suite, which includes a consumable book, digital platform, and a video library. A teacher suite, which has print and digital assessments. Modeled lesson videos, so teachers, if they're not sure about how to set up a particular piece of equipment or how the lesson should look, they can watch a video of the lesson. There are leveled readers and a trade book library that comes for every teacher. There are lab kit materials, that's included in the cost of the program. There's annual replenishment, embedded resources for English learners and special education students, and that was something the teachers really, really liked, was instead of having a supplement at the beginning of the program or a little handout that said, here's how you help all your ELs and your special ed students, instead, in the margins around each lesson were little hints that said, if you have a student who's visually impaired, here's something that will help them with this lesson. Or for students who don't speak English, this aspect will be challenging, here's how you help them. So it was like right there for the teachers. They didn't have to keep going back and looking for it. And it was very focused. It was culturally responsive and accessible. The examples, the pictures, the images all showed children that reflect the diversity of our school district. And it promoted social and emotional learning because there was a lot of collaboration and communication involved. It was a lot of group work and a lot of sharing of ideas so students could practice listening and speaking skills.
Students across the country have begun an adventure with Twig Science Next Gen that will change their lives. Twig Science Next Gen is the only NGSS program in which students investigate phenomena by becoming scientists and engineers in engaging, unforgettable storylines. The program prepares your students for state science tests with assessments created by Stanford University's SCALE team. But most importantly, it prepares your students for STEM careers. Throughout Twig Science Next Gen, students take on over 30 STEM roles. They'll be chemists, astronomers, and coastal engineers. They'll go from working with a Hollywood special effects department to mapping real-life earthquakes as they happen all over the world. They'll engage with scientists and engineers from all walks of life, doing work they can relate to. No other program provides greater access and equity for diverse classrooms. Twig Science en Español is a complete program for bilingual and dual immersion classrooms. And there are additional multilingual films in Mandarin, Arabic, and more. With social and emotional learning threaded throughout, every student can successfully collaborate to deliver STEM projects they are truly proud of. And experience aha moments they'll never forget.
Whoa, that is cool. That is cool.
If approved, our implementation timeline would be to start next year, at the beginning of the school year. There is a 6-year cost for kindergarten through 5th grade. And I did say kindergarten. Right now, we don't offer science to kindergarten. But with the new standards, there are science requirements for kindergarten. So it's something we're going to have to consider and plan for. And the kindergarten teachers report, when they were informally asked, their kids love science. They're very engaged by it. They always have a lot of curiosity about scientific things they see outside, the weather, what is it doing, look at that plant, look at this bug. It all engages them. So we'd like to work some science for kindergarten in, trying to figure out how to fit it in the day, but to get it in there to enrich the learning for those kindergarten, our very youngest students. This cost includes all the materials and resources and a large quantity of customized professional development. Once we approve, they say, well, here's your budget, and basically their rule is you get 1 day of professional development for every $50,000 that you spend. So that's a large quantity of professional development of trainer hours that we would have available to us over the lifetime of the adoption. So the plan is that on if approved, our plan would be on a May 4th early dismissal to give the elementary teachers an initial overview of the program. Throughout the summer, in July, to have contract and service opportunities for teachers to come in with a professional trainer to be introduced with the program. We will have intensive training for our coaches and for me so that we are up to speed and really understand the program deeply and have worked through a lot of it. But we also want to have building level leads who would be teachers who've had that extra training who could answer just a quick incidental question about where do I find the green paperclip, or if I'm setting this up, can I just use regular water or do I need to use, do something to the water first, that kind of question. In August 2022, we do grade level trainings during the opening of school, and then throughout the 22-23 school year have ongoing professional development during full day and early dismissals, maybe with some more after school opportunities, and of course, as always, the team of the science instructional coaches, which is a very valuable team at this point because they can, it gives more hands and more eyes to get into the classrooms and support the teachers. Do you have any questions for me at this time?
Hi, Mrs. Riches. I'm not sure if you remember me.
I do remember you from physics too.
Oh, okay. Okay. So got that out of the way. I just wanted to make the comment that I think I personally like this setup, this program. I think it's actually remarkable that it's been over, 10 years or something like that since our science curriculum has had a relook.
It's been more than that. Some of the units have been here longer than I have been supervisor. We've been supplementing with, we added some reading materials, we've changed out individual modules at a couple of the grade levels, and we've added NSTA's Picture Perfect STEM lessons, but we haven't done a wholesale throw everything out and start fresh for a long time in science.
Yeah, since like few years after I graduated, so this is a long time coming, it seems.
Do we know if other districts are using this program, Twig, and if you've done any
Yes,
research
yes.
on that?
It's, a lot of the districts that are using it right now are on the West Coast that sort of started and grew from there. But William Penn School District has adopted this, and there are some other districts in eastern Pennsylvania that use it.
I think to Damien's question, I just want to give a little history lesson that's, I guess I'll have my throat for a second, that the standards have shifted considerably, and the districts have had to wait for the latest science generation standards to come up. So there's been talk for a number of years about when are these standards going to be officially approved and adopted. So school districts are up against when the Common Core shifted in the middle of a period of time. So school districts are trying to catch up when these standards shifted. These science standards shifted after other standards in math and a focus on English and language arts to nonfiction text. So the science curriculum was waiting for this latest iteration of standards to be approved, and then when they became approved by the Commonwealth, school districts are now trying to play catch up with those standards approvals. The other part that's important to make note of is science, in particular at the elementary school level, in many school districts, don't give a full 30 to 40 minutes every day, all year of science at an elementary school level. They give a semester-based or a number of days of science and social studies because state testing has often influenced elementary school schedules, and there's been a heavy emphasis on English and language arts and reading. And as a result, with the requirements of best practices in English and language arts are for 120 minutes of English and language arts instruction, and you can imagine an elementary school day, it's a little bit over 300 and some odd minutes, you're left with very little time to fit in the other programming. So science and social studies, prior to the shift in the Common Core, were left to the side because there wasn't a focus on nonfiction text. When the Common Core shifted to nonfiction and there were new science standards, school districts had to adjust their curriculum because the old standards were in place for so long. They were called Pennsylvania legacy standards. And I just wanted you to be aware of that, that's all.
I just have one question. You did talk about special education students and EL students. So you said there were some components. You talked a lot about that you're going to have to do a lot of reading in this program, and I'm just wondering for struggling readers if there is some assistive technology built in as far as it reading the text to them and things like that.
There is assistive technology that on the on-screen versions of things, the digital, there would be different reading options that students could exercise and that teachers could use with the students. With some of the printed materials, we have above level, on level, and below leveled materials for each grade level. So a student who's somewhat below would still be able to access the curriculum using a tool. And it doesn't depend entirely on reading. There's reading in there, lots of good nonfiction sources in there, but they can still, and what's important for our students is that when we have struggling readers, when we have ELs who are just learning English, they should be able to understand the concept and use the concept to build the vocabulary, not their knowledge of English allows them to learn the concept.
And I'm assuming the hands-on part of the lesson helps solidify that even
Absolutely.
for students who are
Absolutely.
struggling or might have missed that.
And that's why it's so critical, even though science becomes expensive to keep up with all the stuff, it's very important because, especially for very small children who are still concrete operational, that getting their hands on and holding a thing and understanding that this thing is what this picture is, and they can connect that artifact they're holding or that activity they've done to the words on the page, and that's their moment.
Okay, thank you. And along the lines of the scheduling, how will this, how much time does this program require, and do we have room in our elementary schedule for it? And then I know Ms. Curry has a question.
The program calls for the lessons are not all identically lengthed, because some of them, there's an activity which may take a little longer, or some days have less because you're kind of waiting for your plants to grow, that kind of thing. So ideally, you'd have around 45 minutes on average per day. What is important for this program, and something we're going to have to look at, is having blocks of more the 45 minutes is a consistent, uninterrupted time for science. Right now, a lot of the schools give about an hour for science, and so that's really, that's ideal, but it can be done in a 45 to 60-minute window.
Thank you, Ms. Riches, for the presentation. I just have a question about, I was looking through everything, and I was wondering, a lot of the curriculum that we look at here in the district has a component for home and parents, something that parents can get into with their children. Does this program offer that? And I'm also thinking about our asynchronous students and what might be offered for them through this program.
This program has a very robust online component, very robust digital component. There is capacity for parents to access it, to read some of the materials, watch some of the videos with their students, and there are resources where a teacher can send home, they have prepared communication for teachers to send home that says, hey, parents, this is what we're doing next week in science. Here's things to talk about with your child. And of course, they'd have access to the website even when they're not in class. So they could re-watch, hey, Mom, we saw this great video in science. I want to show it to you. But there also are a lot of online materials for our students who would be learning either synchronously or asynchronously.
Beth and Christine, you know that we have a lot of folks who like to do checkup on reviews on the products and often question the vetting of the products that we bring in, much like Ms. Curry's excellent question about access to home. We did a survey recently on spending the ESSER funding, and one of the top products responses was from families was technology, advancement at home, and parent support to work with students. There's a 2014 iteration of this program that speaks to like a 3 out of 5 star rating. What is the latest review of the latest generation of Twig Science and your review of this?
All the reviews I found from schools that have been using it have been positive. That some of the schools, the only concerns they had were that it did take the time you had to actually do it. And in some school districts, they were trying to shortchange by not doing the labs and just having the kids watch the videos. But I would fight passionately against that, because I believe our kids need to have those physical activities to help them learn.
Yeah, that's what I've read is I think this has been a comment in previous meetings, when you try to supplant the teacher and use the video and the technology in lieu of the hands-on teaching and learning, the product review is not as good. So if we could just continue to emphasize the fact that the teaching aspect of this is as on par with the learning, I think that will be a big part of a positive review on this.
You need the physical teacher with the physical artifacts and the students getting their hands on the things to strengthen the learning.
We have done a good job with our coaches really supporting that idea of hands-on learning. So they have been, with the Picture Perfect STEM that we've been implementing for the last 3 years, we have moved toward the coaches really supporting that type of instruction in the classroom. So our teachers are getting used to hands-on instruction. You have to do the lab. That's how the students engage in science. And Beth, like she keeps saying, that is her big piece. You have to feel science, you have to understand it, and then you can read about it and do everything else.
And I hate to put back the old hat that I used to wear in this district, but another part back to Damien's comment, and these are important conversations, so I don't want to rush it. Science deserves time. And when you have to be an elementary school teacher, I know you both know this, but having been an elementary school principal, the issue is taking a kid out, I only have 30 minutes. I take a kid out, I've got to put the kid away. And so the teacher aspect of this is important, that the time that we're giving teachers to do the hands-on part versus the video, I want to make sure that we understand that the hands-on part is vital. And historically, to Mr. Warsavage's question earlier, the science kits were always invaluable, but when you ask a teacher to shoehorn in half a year at 30 minutes with these kits, their attitude becomes, hey, Dan, let's be honest, how do you want me to fit this in? You show me how to do this with 30 kids in a class with, all these kits. So that's another part of this PD I think is important for people to understand.
Absolutely.
It's my hope to be able to do some PD with I've been talking to Mr. Salerno about this, doing PD with the elementary principals to help them understand the shifts of the new standards and the importance of that time for students to get their hands on and to actually work.
So do we need to look at the elementary schedule to accommodate this program?
I think there's a nervousness and trepidation in elementary schools because there's such a need to implement. So we've got to be careful historically, and this has been a conversation among the board for a long time. I think Mr. Desnoyers has pointed this out in the past too, about the idea of just chasing programs to chase programs. We should not be in the business of just chasing a program to chase a program. The problem in elementary schools is they're being asked to solve all the world's problems. The standards have shifted. Yet you went from state testing that focused on English and language, a reading test, a math test, and then writing was thrown in, but there was really no science other than a science test in 4th grade. Then you shift the standards and you shift and lower, you bring reading standards and push 1st grade standards into kindergarten and got math standards down overnight. And so an elementary school teacher who they say needs at least 50 some odd hours of training in one subject area a year to become a master at it. An elementary school teacher is teaching science, social studies. They have to be a reading specialist, language arts specialist, writing specialist. How do they do all of that when we only have X number of professional development hours and the standards are shifting? And the best practices in reading are still requiring 120 minutes or more in the English and language arts class. Where the Common Core made its shift is that they're saying, hey, wait a minute, everybody. There's a nonfiction world, the computer science geniuses, the folks in finance, the mathematicians are saying, we have just as an important world of reading, and they're recognizing that a focus on nonfiction versus fiction has left out a whole segment of kids who are more excited about reading about the cycle of the Krebs cycle in science. And that shift happened overnight, but what they failed to recognize is the school schedule in elementary school isn't designed. And so now you got to tell a teacher, well, shift away from the English and language arts test that science and social studies are just as important, but all the programming is geared toward 120 minutes of English and language arts work. So we still are going to expect you to do science in 30 minutes for 60 to 90 days a year and social studies for the same amount. And that's the problem. Social studies and science, kindergarten through 8th grade, all the way through No Child Left Behind, were treated almost as if they were non-core classes. And that became generations who've lost access to science and social studies and not the nonfiction aspects. So we do have to revisit the schedule. I know Mr. Salerno's been knocking on my door about that, but the problem is without getting more time in the school day, you are shoehorning in these opportunities. And what has happened, because I know Board President Brown has received these questions that I have to get back to this parent, I apologize, playtime, recess. So historically, elementary schools at the kindergarten center or 1st through 5th grade, ultimately, things like lunch and recess, travel time between classes, all get crunched to fit the instructional time in. Again, what are we finding out? Because of those focus on standardized tests, that's changed curriculum, the changed schedules. We're now in an environment where, what's a problem? Trauma, social, emotional learning. And when you take that away from students who need it the most, what's going to happen? They're struggling here in school. They have no playtime, no time to get that release out. And so there are all the things that we're experiencing all together in schools. And schools historically, throughout No Child Left Behind, cut those types of areas to get more instruction to happen in school time. I'm sorry, but that's the history lesson.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Is there any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mrs. Riches.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Marshallak, if you could move on to agenda item number 2 once you get yourself settled.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pass it right over to Ms. Kelly, who's going to talk about the elementary progress report.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight I'm here to talk to you about the updated elementary electronic progress report. So you may recall a few years ago, we came to you with an electronic progress report, but we said it was our stepping stone to get to this point. And I am very, very excited now that in this collaborative effort that we've had. We've engaged the teachers in this process, we've engaged the technology department, curriculum and instruction came together to get us where we are right now, and definitely a deep understanding of the standards and our assessments has been a part of this project. I have to say thank you to the department, to the district supervisors on this initiative, as well as the instructional coaches who have spent a ton of time really aligning things so our teachers would understand exactly what they are reporting out, so that they can have a better conversation in turn with their parents at conferences, so that everybody would be on the same playing field of understanding what is going on. So I'm very, very excited about this, that we are able to get here. I think when I started in this position as an interim in 2014, this conversation was started. So to actually now see it get to this point is. So the agenda for tonight is I want to show you the purpose of why we are updating it once again and give you an example of that. I want to show you the areas that would be included on the progress report, which is no different than what we saw before, but some of the language has changed to update the parents and to keep that communication open. The next piece is the competency grading scale, because when we're talking about an elementary progress report, we're not talking about grades like our high school brains may know. We're talking about competencies. What are they going to be able to do at the end of that grade level? And then just getting prepared. How can we get parents prepared for the end of the first marking period, which is November 5th of this 2021, this year, of course. So previously, when we were talking about the electronic progress report, it was very crowded, first off, visually, the report card, or progress report, sorry. But it was also an overall just rating or a description of what the student's content knowledge was. So it didn't really break it down for a parent. And I'm going to show you an example on the next slide of that. Our new focus is going to be on the grade level competencies, like I said. So at the end of first grade, what does a student need to know in ELA? They need to know this standard, this standard, this standard. And my example will show you a second grade example of where we are and where we are going with this new progress report. And also, a very exciting point is we will no longer have to print progress reports. We will no longer have to get envelopes and pass them around and sign things. We can do this all through Home Access Center. So we will be teaching parents how to access the Home Access Center to actually view their progress report. There is still a function to print it if the parent chooses to print it. And we also have the ability to request a printed copy if the parent does ask the school to print a copy as well. So in this next slide, you'll see an example of the previous progress report. So what it used to say for a second grade parent was a Module 1 assessment, and it would say Module 1 test, reading, writing, and process writing. So a parent would look at that and say, okay, what does that mean? And that was, it was still based on our ELA framework. It was still based on the standards. But what we were able to do now is go to this competency base. So you'll see on the your right-hand side, now the parent will see determines the meaning of words or phrases in grade level text. So the description of what is reporting out for a Module 1 test in reading is now framed a little bit different so that the parent is able to understand that. This will happen in all the content areas, which I'll show in the next slide as well. Then also another example would demonstrates the ability to analyze informational text and can determine the main idea and details. So now a parent knows that when we're talking about reading, what the child does need to know is informational text and main idea and detail. So it gives that conversation more background for the parent as well as the teacher. And when the conferences come about, they are able to describe, okay, well, what does this mean? How can I help and support my student at home? And what are we doing in the classroom? Areas on the progress report. So like I said, these areas have not changed. We'll continue to report out on the 4 main subject areas or your core subject areas of ELA, math, science, and social studies. Ames Web Data will still be there. It was there in the previous progress report. The special areas will still be displayed. Attendance now will be displayed. And the great thing about attendance is it will be pulled right from our Student Information Center. Or system, excuse me. So before, the teachers would have to go in and pull it off of another report and actually put it on the report. So there's a lot of manual entering for that piece, and now that's able to happen. Also, comments will be there, and they were there before, but they were on a separate sheet. The comments will now be attached for an English competency, a math competency, a science. So it'll all be right there on the parents' side so that they can read the whole report. Also, the expectations and the work habits will also be displayed on the progress report. So what is displayed has not changed. How we're displaying it is changing a little bit, but it will be more user-friendly, we hope, for parents and teachers as well, and so that conversation and the communication can work hand in hand. The competency grading scale, so this is how they'll be grading out. So again, we are working towards meeting the grade level expectation. So the grading scale would be a 4, 3, 2, and 1. Each time, again, for a competency is what we're trying to accomplish by the end of that school year. And we'll make sure that in all of our parent communication, they understand what that competency means. That grade level standard is what they need to know by the end of first grade, the end of second grade. Also, the behavior and work habits rubric is going to stay the same. So many schools, or all of our schools saw a VG for very good, a satisfactory, and a needs improvement. Again, that's not changing, just the format of how things will look for the parent would be changing there. So getting prepared for the end of this first marking period. So again, the end of the first marking period is November 5th, so it's approaching very, very quickly. Our first parent communication with reading the report card and how to access Home Access Center, because we want to be proactive, will be on November 3rd. So in the Wednesday folder, we'll start communicating and say, try to log into Home Access Center. Make sure that you have all your passwords. Make sure you know where you're going to access the report card, or the progress report, excuse me. The next piece will be that on the district website, all of our parent resources will be updated, and this will all be in that communication on November 3rd. And then if you need a printed, requesting a printed copy, that will also be included in that November 3rd communication on how a parent could reach out and do that through their building principal. At the same time, as we're preparing the parents, of course, I'm preparing the teachers as well. So the teachers will have an in-service day on the 2nd. We've already been doing sneak peeks at what they have to see. We've been training them on how to use the rubrics to get the information on the progress report. And November 2nd, they'll be spending the morning at the elementary level really digging in there and getting support from any instructional coach, my office, with using the rubrics and getting the grades in into the system itself. The last piece, Home Access Center will go live for elementary parents as well as everybody in the school district to see the final marking period grades on November 19th. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Yes, this looks very promising. Thank you for bringing this forward. I have one question from a teacher perspective. So for the core areas and the specials, how will the teachers input the competency levels, if I got the terminology correct?
You did. So I think of it almost as a high school teacher. I think of it as my grade book. I have all of my students down the side, and then you'll see there's a few little clicks, but it will say ELA. I'll see all of the names, and I'll put the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1. To get to that 4, 3, and 2, and 1, some background had to happen. So they did item analysis for their tests to figure out how to get to the 4, how to get to the 3, how to get to the 2, the 1. And that's been happening so that they're ready for November 2nd's PD with just the technology piece. So they're ready with the test information. We'll train them on the technology, and then the 2 roads should meet.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yep, my question is a little different. I'm just trying to understand like the catalyst or the reasoning for the change to the new format. I mean, I looked at the first slide, one of the early slides, and it says to align it to the Pennsylvania core standard. Is that the catalyst for the change?
So,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I think there were a few catalysts for this change. The standards did shift. They shifted a while back for math and ELA, and now you'll hear science, so we will have to make some updates. But the report card that we were using, we were forcing the Performance Plus, a system that was not a competency-based system, to do something that it shouldn't have been doing. So, and you'll remember that we had to do a lot of training for parents to read that little graph and the diamond and the color coding and everything, and then we printed them out without the colors. So it was very difficult for the parents to read and understand. So I think that was a few different things that came together to create the change. I will tell you that for a number of years, the teachers through the IAC process, which is when they come to me and ask me to fix things, help us get to a point that we're not printing a progress report, we are not printing out a comment sheet, we're not using envelopes anymore. We need to get to a more electronic system as well. So I think we've heard all of those pieces, and I think that that's why this next iteration is coming.
Thank you very much.
We've probably revisited making corrections to the elementary school report card. There's probably been a committee every 2 to 3 years on frustrations with the elementary school report card. Years ago, in early 2000s, the district moved to a standards-based report card, a reaction to your excellent question to standards and standardized tests. So the school district shifted many years ago to a standards-based report card that reported students as BB, P, A. So there were concerns from parents of special education students or general education students that they would receive a report card, and it was very complicated, but it also had like BB, you know, your kid's below basic. And there were students, parents who were concerned that they would receive a report card and it reflected horribly and didn't really show on any growth or any progress. You know, I'll use myself as an example of a kid, you know, your effort that you're making in class as a student should demonstrate your growth over time. Under the first iteration of those report cards, growth didn't matter. You either ran the mile at a certain race speed or you didn't. And that made you either a P or a BB on the report card. And there wasn't as much feedback to a parent who received that. And then there was the concern about the communication of those competencies and the standards. So there's been iteration after iteration, and believe it or not, teachers and parents disagreeing on what they'd like to see on the report cards. It's very, I thank God I don't have to do it anymore, Christine. And so I think after years of being a part of this, I think Christine got to a place now where we have better technology, thanks to the board and thanks to the community in the district. And we're at a place where some of the standards have calmed down a little bit. But as a computer person, you know there's a lot of background work where not all of these computer systems are intuitive to say, what's an Ames Web score on an oral reading fluency mean here versus the particular assessment you're using, and how does that make a 4 to Neil's question? And so there weren't intuitive or enough systems in elementary school to understand how complicated it is to be a kindergarten student and to access EL. And so that's why we've had to get to where we had to get to.
I just have a quick follow-up. You brought it to you reminded me of it when you mentioned the compatibility. When I worked at a middle school, it was something called the Scholastic SIF. It was the Scholastic Interoperability Framework. And all of the applications that the school used had to be compatible so that they can talk to one another. Is there something like that that still exists?
So all of this is going through eSchool, and it's going through our information system. So, but behind the scenes, I've learned a lot about programming behind the scenes in these last few days. This is not a world that I want to live in. But yes, so we made sure everything was matching, all the language in all of the schools matched, and then we were able to build out the report card from there. So a lot of it, as long as our student information system, our brain is good and all aligned, we were good to go. So there were a lot of tweaks behind the scenes. And Bob and his team have been absolutely awesome, as well as the reps from eSchool. I think I've been on the phone with them like every day, just trying to figure out, okay, what's missing here? Why don't I see this here? Things that I'm just used to saying, enter, there it is. So.
Yeah, just to add, certain SIS systems, student information systems, are good at certain aspects, like reporting out state requirements of highly qualified teachers in the past or scheduling a school. But as you know, and board members here know who do some of this outside of here, is working with software and background on that information. A lot of these are a la carte now. A lot of these SIS systems are aware of some of these boutique aspects, so there's upcharges to certain aspects. And under previous iterations of our student information system, they may have been strong in one aspect, to your point, where the other part wasn't there.
Right.
But then they would join for IEPs with another organization. And so that's why it's been even more complicated. So you're spot on with your question.
I do want to say, Ms. Kelly, that I know you remember when I brought to new business, I think in 2018, about a new report card for the elementary. So I'm really happy to see this today. I really want to just go back to the slide number 6 with the content area and specials and the behavior and work habits. So the rubric is the part that concerns me. I know that you said it's not changing very much, it's staying in place. I, as far as the behavior and work habits are concerned, really would like to just hear a little bit more about how that takes place, particularly when we're looking at students, particularly now, since we've been through COVID, students have been at home, and the biases that take place through behavior and work habits, what that rubric looks like and what that is going to mean for parents is very important to me. I think that looking at the old way of looking at this progress report for elementary, it will be refreshing to see a difference. It was very complicated for many parents that I talked to, really to the point where they just were like, I'm not going to look at it. And I had many conversations on that level. And so now, looking at that's what stuck out to me was the behavior and work habits. And I'd like to know a little bit more, and for the public and the parents, how that will be, worked on through this progress report.
Sure.
Thank you.
So believe it or not, I'm going to turn it over to Ed with this part, because Ed and his team have been working on this side. I forgot to say that it's been a very collaborative effort. Like I said, I think we've worked with every department too. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Ms. Curry. So one of the things that we have heard is that the confusion across other schools, the consistency was not there with the rubric itself. So one of the things we changed for this school year was making a consistent rubric across all of our elementary schools. Based on the number of incidents or behavior incidents that are recorded, determines what threshold a student may report on that progress report. And the goal behind that is not to give a student a bad mark or say that they are poorly behaved, but to start the conversation with the families in terms of what can they do to improve and what are we doing also to intervene and provide support for that child in the classroom. Because we don't want them to reflect on just being a bad student or a poor student, but their interventions aligned with student behavior to support them, just like we do with reading and math. When they're struggling reading and math, we provide interventions. We do the same for expectations and behavior as well. So it's a more consistent approach and a more user-friendly approach for parents to understand across our district.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, because, certainly how we record the way our children are in the classroom is very important. It follows them. And so even at the elementary level, we just need to be really consistent with that and making sure that we're not just marking the way we feel about a particular student in a classroom. We know that can happen, and how that follows the student through their career. So I just want to make sure that is something that is, has a pretty good standard across the line, and I appreciate you speaking about that.
And just to add on to your question too, if parents are seeing, if they do see a consistent needs improvement or whatever it might be from marking period to marking period, they need to ask, what are you doing for my child then? How are you intervening? What support are you providing my student to overcome this challenge? So again, the conversation needs to happen at that meeting with the parent, with the teachers, and if they are not seeing improvement, ask why, and ask what's being done to support that child in the classroom.
I definitely can appreciate that. I also feel like it's our responsibility in the classroom to be able to offer that as well. So not so much falling on the parents when they see needs improvement, but also having it from the teacher perspective to say, this is what the plan is, because we have to treat this as a holistic piece. I know behavior is up right now. And, when you think about children who have been at home, and this next report card, I'm interested to see what it will look like with this particular rubric, because you figure, I know we were having a conversation at the middle school. The last time those children were in school was in 4th grade. And so they get to middle school now, and they have, responsibilities to be in middle school. What does that look like? And so how does that come out on paper? How does that follow them? Those are all the things that I think we have to work collaboratively, parent side and teacher side, to have a plan for behavior, because it does follow a student. It's documentation, right? And so a rubric is used as documentation. And so we just want to make sure that those processes are fair and they're looked at and continue to look at for all the things we've been working on, right, Dr. McGarry, in terms of trauma-informed care, all those pieces across the board. We just have to really make sure that this particular progress report, and that's what it's called, is doing all those pieces and not leaving anything out.
I just want to say to Ms. Curry's point too, we've done a lot of work during COVID on our adult changing of behaviors. And I think as much as work we put into it, coming back with all the students, for one, I think this board has heard me say time and time again throughout the pandemic in our informational sessions, I was worried about returning kids back into school after what we've gone through. I said there was more than one pandemic happening to the kids in this community. We discussed that, and this board has been great about it. We spent a lot of time on being trained as restorative justice administrators and teachers, and we put a lot of time and effort into that. And I think, Ed talking about this idea of the normative culture and the PBIS lessons and the matrix, each school struggled with the idea that certain schools and certain communities start at a certain point and they grow from that point. And there is often frustration in education because it's natural, sometimes in this job you want to point the finger at somebody and you can't. You got to recognize the fact that I have a responsibility in this. I can control what I can control. What's my part in working with home and school? What's my part in working with a child? And we're doing a lot of work on that aspect of it. I definitely think that starting this school year has been tough coming out of COVID. We were making inroads prior to the pandemic. But we spent a lot of time, Dr. Manfrey, myself, Ed Marshallak, Frank Salerno, lead teachers on restorative practice. And there needs to be a belief that, I'll speak for myself, when I was a kid, I made some mistakes at times. I frustrated my mom and dad or different people. And you should deserve a chance to restore and grow from that. And I'm happy to say that where the district is going, championed by the school board in particular, that we are moving and have moved in a direction of, hey, there are consequences for actions sometimes, but you're not a horrible person and you're not a horrible kid, and we're going to restore that relationship, and that's the best way to learn and grow. So you're not afraid to have those conversations with students with each other, with a teacher and a child, parents with each other, and that restorative approach is embedded in every disciplinary decision we make. Even if we move toward an expulsion, Dr. Manfrey, myself, Ed Marshallak, or Frank Salerno, make sure that we have a restorative plan in place no matter what we're going to do to work with those kids to help those students, because discipline of its very nature is to change a behavior for a positive outcome. So I want the board to know that that's in every decision that we're looking to make.
Ms. Kelly, am I correct in believing that the progress reports will show previous reports so the progress of the student is accessible to the parent on the current report?
So each time a parent logs in, they will see the previous marking period. So you would see growth. So you'll see marking period 1 still with whatever competency they've met or began to meet. So if you look back at our rubric, if they had a 2, let's say, on counting and cardinality, that I was able to count objects in kindergarten, I had a 2, but then in the next marking period, it could show a 3. So you would see that growth happening through the standard until they met or exceeded the standard.
Okay, and
Is that your question?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
And then in terms of the standards, during classroom instruction, standards are often introduced, but they may not be taught explicitly. This skill would be said possibly to be emerging. Once the skill is explicitly taught, a student's understanding of the standard will be developing, going on to proficiency, and finally, hopefully, mastery of that standard. Is that similar to this 1, 2, 3, 4 concept?
Yes. So you'll see that some of the standards will only be, especially in science or social studies, the standard only appears maybe one time. So they may meet it, and then you may never see it again on the report card, but you'll still see the 3, but then you don't see anything else because that standard has been met, and it doesn't need to go anywhere else. We see it in certain sections of ELA also, depending on the grade level. So you will see that standard, you'll see that they've met the standard, and then you'll see movement from that standard into the next building block, let's say.
Okay.
What did that standard do for the next standard that the student has to master in that grade level?
Okay, and my last one is a parent's preference for printed progress reports. Is that saved for future progress reports, and is that something a parent would select in the home access center?
Yes, so a part of the directions for the parents will be how to download the report card so that they can save it in their own file, or they can request that printed copy and keep their old manila folder kind of copy also. So they will have that ability to save. They'll also have the ability to go back in previous years to see how the student did in, let's say, second grade or third grade, wherever they were before.
Well, no, I'm speaking towards like if a family does not have internet and the student uses a district hotspot and, you know, the parent could use that hotspot to access the home
Yes.
access center, but would they still be able to get a school-provided report?
Yes,
And would that preference
absolutely.
be saved?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely,
All right.
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
First of all, thank you so much for all your work you did on this, and I worked in e-school before, so I know how much work you did. Second of all, to kind of piggyback off of Mrs. Curry's point, I think we do need to be careful with numbers, because I think when you use a number system, unlike if you give a student 80% on a test or a 90% on a test, something like that is very concrete. Everybody knows exactly what that means. You have a B. If you give somebody a 2, that's very subjective, right? What does that 2 really mean? And I've heard it said in some schools, and I'm not saying that happens here, but sometimes we want students to improve, right? So we move them from a 1 to a 2, or what does that 2 mean to this teacher as opposed to what that 2 means to this teacher for behavior, right? So everything is very subjective. So I think we do just need to be careful what it means for our students for behavior. So I just want to validate that I really do hear your point. Yeah.
All right, I know this was an informational item, so thanks for going over it with us. So I think that ends our agenda. So what we are going to do right now is take public comments on the agenda items. So if there's anyone here in the room that has any comments on any of the agenda items, please make your way to the microphone. Okay, I don't see any. So Ms. Buford, are there any comments? Actually, yeah, are there any comments already emailed in?
There are no comments.
Okay. All right. So we only have one agenda item to decide if we're going to move forward, and that is the Twig science. So I'm just going to, is everyone in agreement with that? Yes? Yes?
Yes.
All right. Well, I guess we're doing that. Say again? Okay. I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Mr. Brown to conclude it.
A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.